watching Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Welcome back to Digital Photography One-on-One. Well, we've been getting a lot of great questions, but we've been seeing two quite a bit. Those questions are, how do I use a light meter, and which light meter should I buy? First, I'm going to show you how to use a light meter. Then I'll give you some guidance as to which light meter you should buy. But before I do any of that, let me first show you how light meters work. There are two basic methods of metering light: incident metering and reflective metering. Your camera's built-in light meter uses reflective metering. Here's how it works. Light travels from its source and reflects off the subject and into your camera's lens. When the light enters your camera, it travels down the lens and then it hits a mirror. The light is then reflected at a 45-degree angle up into the pentaprism and finally out the eyepiece. The mirror and pentaprism allow us to see exactly what's coming through the lens. Some of the light is allowed to travel through the main mirror and hit a secondary mirror. This smaller mirror reflects the light onto a light meter. This built-in light meter is what your camera uses to show you meter readings in the viewfinder. When you press your shutter release button, both of these mirrors move out of the way, the shutter opens, and the exposure is made. When you are using flash heads that are synced to your camera, they don't fire until the shutter is completely open, which means that your built-in light meter has no way of seeing and metering this light. For studio work, you'll need an incident light meter. Instead of metering light that reflects off the subject, incident meters measure the light that is actually falling on the subject itself. You simply place the meter next to your subject and take a reading. In a normal studio setup, you'll set your camera and light meter to the same shutter speed and ISO setting. When you take a meter reading, the light meter will tell you the correct aperture value and you'll set your camera accordingly. Once you're totally set up, you'll only have to worry about the aperture value. Wow, that was pretty cool. For this demo, I'm going to concentrate on using a light meter for studio strobe lighting. Let's dive right in. The first thing you're going to want to do is set your camera to manual mode. If you leave your camera on any of the auto modes, you're going to run into all kinds of problems. Once you have your camera set to manual mode, we need to set our shutter speed to your camera's sync speed. If you don't know much about sync speed, just look at episode 1 of Digital Photography One-on-One. The other thing we want to do is set our ISO to a low ISO setting. That'll make sure our images aren't very noisy. So I've set my camera to ISO 100. Now that we have all that set up, we need to make sure that our meter is set to match our camera settings. Most meters have several metering modes. This is the Seikonic L358 and it's got 4 metering modes. The first mode is for metering ambient light. So if you just want to see what kind of ambient light, direct sunlight, or if you're outside shooting, that's what you'd use that mode for. But for metering flash photography, we have some special modes. The first one allows you to push this button, which is called a trigger, and what it does is it tells the meter to wait for a flash. And once the flash fires, then it gives you a readout. But the last two modes are the ones that most photographers use. The first one is the cable sync mode, and that allows you to plug in a cable to your meter, and then when you pull the trigger, it actually signals the flashes to fire, and you get an instant readout. And the last one is for Pocket Wizard metering, or wireless metering, and that's usually what I use. And what that does is you don't have to have a cable hooked up to your generator or your monolight. A radio will tell your flash to fire, and you can meter that way. So once you have the correct mode chosen, then you need to set your ISO speed to match what your camera was set to. So my camera, remember, was set to ISO 100, so I've set my light meter also to ISO 100. And then finally, you need to set your meter to your camera's sync speed. So my camera's sync speed is 1/250th of a second, so I set my meter also to 250th of a second. And now the camera and the meter are all in sync and we're ready to get started. So let me show you how to do that. So we have here a basic portrait lighting setup. We've got a key light, a fill light, and right behind us we have a separation light. There's nothing really fancy about it. So I want to show you how to meter this setup. It's pretty simple. What we'll do is we'll take our meter, we'll put it right at our model's face, point this little white thing, it's called the Lumisphere. We'll point that right at the camera, pull the trigger, that'll make the flashes fire, and then we can see what our our aperture setting is. Since we've already set the shutter speed and the ISO, really the only thing left to set is our aperture setting. So our meter tells us that this is f8. And so we'll set our camera to f8 and we're set and ready to go. Now I know you also want to know how to set different lights so that we have one a little bit brighter, one a little bit softer. So to do that, you'll have to meter each light independently. What we need to do is take the Lumisphere and put it down, and then we can point our meter at the light that we want to meter. The reason we have this down is it will keep the light from the other lights from hitting our Lumisphere. So if I want to meter the key light here, I'll just instead of pointing it at the camera, I'll point it at the light and see what that meters. And that meters at f10. And so let's see what our fill light meters here. We'll do that. And that meters at f9, so we can see what our ratios are and we can adjust those accordingly. Now, after you've metered each of your lights and set your light powers accordingly and got the look you want, make sure that you put your Lumisphere back up, point that at the camera, and take a meter reading again. And then set your camera accordingly. A lot of people have sent in the same question, and that is, which light meter should I buy? Well, I highly recommend this one. This is the Seikonic L358 light meter. It's the meter I use in my studio. It'll do almost anything you need it to do in a studio situation. But if you need a little bit more power, for instance, you're shooting outside or doing a lot of scenic work, you might need something that does spot meter reading. For that, I recommend the L758DR. It's also a Seikonic light meter, and it'll do almost anything a light meter can do. It's really the cat's meow. Well, that's it for this episode of Digital Photography 101. Thanks again, Megan. That was a lot of fun. Remember, if you have a question that you'd like to send us, send it to studiolighting@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by SnapFactory.com and StudioLighting.net. For more information about our workshops, visit SnapFactory.com.